We're also learning more about what happened to slain journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Turkey issuing its first official statement on how it believes Khashoggi was killed. Now, according to prosecutors, the dissident columnist was immediately strangled after he entered the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. They say that his body was then dismembered and destroyed. Turkish officials also reiterated that the attack was part of a premeditated plot. Following a visit from Saudi Arabia's chief prosecutor in Istanbul, Turkish President Erdogan said he wants to see the investigation come to a quick end.
We cannot let this issue hang. If we do, we would be in debt with humanity. We would have a debt of conscience. And neither our judiciary mechanisms nor our political mechanisms can handle this. To be solved now, there is no point in excuses.
All right, joining us now to talk about these developments is Micah Halpern, a Middle East analyst. Micah, thanks for being with us.
Always a pleasure.
So, Micah, now Turkey offering a slightly different take of this event, keeping in mind there have been tremendous inconsistencies from both sides. What's your reaction to this latest development?
Well, it's just the last of a series of new ideas. The reality is that Turkey and Saudi Arabia are having tension here. And the tension, when Turkey gets frustrated with the answers given to them by Saudi Arabia in terms of investigation, Turkey then leaks either officially or unofficially information. Hence trying to pressure Saudi Arabia to give more information out as to what really happened in this interrogation or execution.
Well, this was the official statement by Turkish prosecutors. As for the leaking, we have seen Turkish officials claim that they have video and perhaps audio evidence of this attack, and yet that evidence hasn't been released, at least as far as we know. Why is that?
Well, firstly, it's still at the stage where we're talking about Turkey and Saudi Arabia here. We're not talking about the United States and Great Britain. So we're talking about countries that are not really democracies. And Turkey is struggling with that democratic definition. But the reality is they just can't let these things out. You should note that the head of the CIA did hear the audio tapes, at least according to Turkish sources. So has it been confirmed
that Gina Haspel has heard these tapes?
No,
has she confirmed this?
No, she would not confirm it because she's the head of the CIA. But the Turks have said that they played it for her. And that's important to note also. It's valuable to understand what's going on here. There was really a setup for the Saudi journalist. It was set up in a way which was interesting. The first time he came into the consulate, he was received very well, hence almost luring him back because they said, come back with more information and fill out more forms. And when he came back, then the trap was sprung. So the question was, why did he go in the first place? He was asked to come back.
Well, because this was a setup and such a conspicuous killing, many are pointing to the fact that it just doesn't add up for this to have been officially ordered by the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He, for one, is denying that he knew about it, claiming that it was rogue actors. I mean, would it make sense for him to do this on Turkish soil in such an obvious way, knowing that all fingers would point at him and knowing that this would put the relationship between the Saudis and the Trump administration in jeopardy, as well as obviously create more tension between the Turks and the Saudis? Are we to believe that he was just so arrogant that he didn't think this kind of killing would cause such an outcry?
The risks are enormous to have anything like this happen. The question is whether or not they realized or thought that they could do it under the radar or not. The reality is that 18 people in the inner circle of Saudi Arabia have already been... But how is it under the radar,
Micah, if it's done at the consulate in Turkey, assuming they wanted to get rid of this guy? Weren't there more discreet ways of doing it, assuming that this was ordered by the Crown Prince?
We've had hits in Turkey before. Iran has successfully done hits in Turkey also. Turkey is a prime place for those attacks. Interestingly, the Saudis have already arrested 18 people, 5 in inner circle, 2 extremely close to the Crown Prince have already been arrested. That doesn't necessarily mean that the Crown Prince was involved or not involved, but it does mean that it goes certainly high enough to that level to see. There is a possibility that there's a conspiracy or a way in which to try to, let's say, get and destroy the credibility of the United States' relationship with Saudi Arabia and Israel's relationship with Saudi Arabia, by the way, which you should know, Khashoggi himself was tremendously anti the relationship between Israel and Saudi Arabia and made it very, very clear publicly in writing as well as in speeches. That said, it's important to recognize that this kind of act is going to rip ultimately the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia.
But does it have to? If that was the intention behind this act, assuming that this was a rogue act, does the U.S. have to then take the bait and and destroy its entire Middle East policy over this? I mean, look, I imagine that the Trump administration wants to buy the rogue act theory. Even if it's true or not true, it makes it more convenient. Does this killing of one dissident journalist merit unraveling an entire Middle East policy?
Well, the United States has to be very clear on the fact that they cannot countenance any type of murder like this by anyone, anywhere, especially of a journalist, whether it be in Turkey or anywhere else, at the hands of any government or at the hands of anyone. So that's got to be perfectly clear. On the other hand, it's really important that the United States not alter its fundamental principles in the region. And their fundamental principles right now are to pressure Iran. They can't pressure Iran without Saudi Arabia. So they have to, on one hand, articulate that they're against the murder of a Saudi journalist, but on the other hand, recognize that they need Saudi Arabia in order to advance in their plan at all with regard to Iran. And that is really where the 8-ball is. The 8-ball is Iran, not anything else.
Micah, can we assume that the Trump administration's call for ending the war in Yemen is perhaps a response to the alleged killing of Jamal Khashoggi by the Saudis, considering that this is one of the proxy wars that he has supported?
This is an exact move. In other words, once the Saudis are involved, or the link between Saudi Arabia and an execution or an assassination of a journalist in the West, let's say we'll call Turkey the West,
right,
then the next line has to come up. And the next line is, of course, the civil war in Yemen. There's a big problem with civil war in Yemen because it really is a Sunni Shiite issue. And if the Saudis are not going to step back, they can't.
All right, Micah, thank you for your analysis. Micah Halpern.